Without further ado, I'd like to call up tonight's speaker, Sayyid Mahdi Modarresi. Please do greet him with a loud salawat. Salawat ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad.
Camera? Yeah. 3 minutes. Oh, 3. Awesome. Thank you.
محمد آل محمد بلند السلام.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين، والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء وسيد المرسلين وحبيب إله العالمين أبي القاسم محمد. اللهم صل. وعلى أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين المكرمين الغرر الميامين، سيما بقية الله في الأراضين وحجته على الخلائق أجمعين، سيدنا وإمام زماننا وصاحب نعمتنا وولي أمرنا مهدي هذه الأمة وطاووس أهل الجنة الحجة بن الحسن العسكري، فداه أرواح العالمين. اللهم صل. قال الله العظيم في محكم كتابه الكريم: أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. إنا لننصر رسلنا والذين آمنوا في الحياة الدنيا ويوم يقوم الأشهاد. آمنا بالله. صدق الله العلي العظيم. Will Durant, who is one of the foremost historians of the modern age, the author of the Story of Civilization, a very respected scholarly figure, was once asked a question: who, in your opinion, had the greatest influence on the 20th century? We could say the 21st, but the 20th century is the predominant century. Who was the single most influential figure in the 20th century? Simple enough, and yet profoundly difficult to answer. Here's what he said. He said, well, there are lots of influential figures that I could mention. I mean, there were people whose contributions, both positive as well as negative, altered the course of history. They really changed the shape and the landscape of world politics, as well as every other human field. So there are many people that we can mention. Think about it. There are personalities such as Karl Marx, for example. Once again, we're not condemning or condoning any of these personalities or the ideas that they adopt. We're not talking about whether or not their contributions were positive or negative. We're not saying whether the implications of their contributions or the influence that they exerted on the world were good or bad. And to understand why they are so influential, all you have to do is imagine a world without them. It would be a completely different picture. Karl Marx, socialist ideology, the one on whose theories the principles and the pillars of communism were placed. Two great superpowers, two of the greatest countries on this earth, rose based on his theories: China and the former USSR. So Karl Marx and every other socialist movement and revolution that took place around the world is attributed to this man. Was he the most influential figure? You also have people like the inventors, the likes of Thomas Edison. And of course, the influence that Thomas Edison can take credit for in this world is massive. And that's an understatement. Without his inventions, not the least of which, of course, is the light bulb, without that, urbanization would have been difficult, if not impossible. Industrial revolutions would have been impossible. What about the likes of Alexander Graham Bell? Of course, it was his contributions that eventually led to the inventions of the telephone system, or the telex, or the internet, mass communication, global trading. Things of that nature would not have been possible without mass communication, the spark of which was triggered by Alexander Graham Bell. Well, what about people like Charles Darwin? Darwin obviously he altered the scientific view of biology. He created what they call a paradigm shift. He provided an alternative to creationism and to intelligent design by saying the species that we see in the world today are the product of evolution and not intelligent design or creationist ideology. Once again, like I said, we're not condemning or condoning, but indeed these individuals had a very profound impact on the world in which we live. And as a matter of fact, Will Durant, he opted to mention the inventors as having the most influence on the world and having been the most influential figures in this world. He mentioned Thomas Edison. He mentioned Darwin. You've got Isaac Newton, for example. And Isaac Newton, the modern physics that the Industrial Revolution was based on, modern physics on which some of the greatest discoveries in this world, as well as the celestial world, the heavens, the universe at large, all of these are based on Newtonian physics. In fact, Einsteinian physics and the special and the general theory of relativity are also based on Newtonian physics. And Will Durant opted to mention these examples as having been the most influential figures in history. But let's expand on this question a little bit and look at it in a more general sense of the term. Who was the most influential figure in history? To whom can we attribute the greatest amount of influence, impact in human society? Generally speaking, there are four categories of people who had the greatest amount of influence. The first is politicians, people of power, governments, kings, dynasties, presidents, people who deal with matters of authority, dominance, power, politics. People like Alexander the Great. Alexander the Great, whose job was to conquer other lands and include them in his kingdom, include them in his, great empire. You have people like the pharaohs. The Pharaoh dynasty was, of course, even though they adopted a very religious garb, they wore a religious garb and they put on a religious mask and said that we are gods and the object